Hi, my name is Thomas Hynes, and I'm the author of Wild City, A Brief History of New York City and 40 Animals. As you can see from the cover, it was illustrated by the supremely talented Kath Nash. So I love New York City, but I honestly never considered its wildlife. I knew there were parks, but I highly doubted there was much nature. Some rats and pigeons, sure, but nothing else. It turns out New York City is a surprisingly wild city. And the most astonishing thing I discovered is the vital role these animals have played in the city's history. Indeed, New York City did not grow to such heights in spite of its surrounding nature, but rather rose to become the most famous metropolis in the world because of its nature. These wild creatures are not some footnote or historical aside to the saga that is New York City. These animals are the story, they are the city, and they always have been. You see, way back before the arrival of the Dutch, back when this was Lenape land, New York City was overflowing with wildlife, including black bears, gray wolves, and fish of countless stripes. Eric Sanderson, the author of Mannahatta, offers this fun thought exercise. Imagine if America had been settled west to east instead of the other way around. There's a good chance that New York City would have been a national park. But of course, New York City went in the other direction, built up an urban landscape the likes of which the world had never seen before. To do so, New York City drew on its natural wealth and other unique advantages. When we look at a map, we see that New York City is surrounded by broad and navigable rivers, protected by a series of barrier islands, and sits only 7 miles from the open ocean. In other words, you would be hard-pressed to create a more ideal setting for a harbor city if you tried. And things were even better on land, where there were fortunes to be made. According to American mythology, Europeans came to this continent and the city in search of freedom. And sure, maybe some did, but truly, cash ruled everything around Manhattan. And even back in the day, New York City was a moneymaker. Now early on, that meant beaver skins, as well as the pelts of otters, mink, and muskrats. Later it was fish and oysters, more oysters than the world had ever seen before. And soon, that small original Dutch settlement at the tip of southern Manhattan spread out in every direction, including up. The landscape was totally remade. For example, there's a lot more of New York City today than there was on that day Henry Hudson arrived in 1609. By way of landfill, including all the earth dug up to make way for subway tunnels, New York City has bulged outward for centuries. It's bad for maritime species, but it's great for real estate. And truly, there was so much to be had back then that there was no sense in worrying for the future. Forbearance, prudence, conservation, forget about it. The trash could be burned, tossed into the wetlands, hauled out to sea, or better yet, dealt with later. Surely these good times of natural prosperity, free from want and consequence and repercussion, would last forever. But as the story goes, things went to shit, in some cases, literally. The harbor was overfished and simultaneously inundated with centuries of human waste. The forests were cut down, the streams were paved over, the beavers were trapped and thought never to be seen again. The air was poisoned, many birds were driven to the brink of extinction, the natural borders of the shoreline were pushed out until one constant bulkhead emerged, destroying countless habitats while leaving the city needlessly vulnerable to flooding. And the garbage was piled hundreds of feet high, higher than the Statue of Liberty, until finally the landscape was unsuitable for the natural world and barely any better for humans. Incredibly, in that relatively short period of 350 years between the arrival of the Dutch and the end of the 1960s, New York City, once an ecological gem the likes of which the world had never seen before, was all but ruined. And by the time landmark environmental regulations such as the Clean Water Act of 1972 were enacted, a cross-species urban exodus was already underway. Indeed, it wasn't just the animals that were leaving. Many refer to this period as the city's dark days, when those who could afford to do so left for the suburbs, and those who remained endured a diseased city, a bruised apple rotting to its core. Wild City is a reminder of what happens when society doesn't consider how its actions play out downstream. These are the stories of those collisions between nature and our urban experiment. There have been quite a few surprises and plenty of unintended consequences. But this book is also a comeback story, a tale of redemption, about a city once epitomized by blight and pollution, and now towers above its peers as an example of balanced and sustainable urban living. Although it seemed like a long shot just a few decades ago, New York City actually has cleaned up its act, as well as its rivers, its harbor, and its parks. Real ecological amends have been made, and slowly, yet steadily, many of the original native species have returned, accompanied by many new species that are eager to try their hand, or paw, feather, or fin, at city living. And here in New York City, of all places, they have found a greener, cleaner, and healthier place to live. Now, as part of my research for this book, I paddled a canoe down the Bronx River in search of beavers. I visited a hospital for pigeons on the Upper West Side. I sought out parrots in a Brooklyn cemetery, tended honeybee hives on a midtown roof, spotted peregrine falcons hunting above the East River, built artificial oyster beds on Governor's Island, witnessed endangered birds darting along a rehabilitated landfill in Staten Island, moved quietly through a coyote's overgrown habitat in Queens, and watched with wonder as whales crashed among the waves just off the city's shoreline. I soon came to realize that these critters made up a crucial part of a wildly different New York City than I ever knew existed. And that's the city I hope to share here with you. With Wild City, a brief history of New York City and 40 animals. Thanks so much.